Forward to the cloud.
Perfect.
So we all have to say got it.
Got
Well, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again with you today. When Trudy said that AARP helped us stay in control, I thought, oh, I need a lot more help for that. But other than that, oh, in control, oh my God. Anyway, welcome. As I said, today's program will be called A Multiplicity of Voices. And I'm going to use works from both the Smithsonian American Art Museum and the Renwick. This is the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. And this is our beautiful covered courtyard with its lovely canopy. And the Renwick is the Contemporary Crafts and Decorative Arts part of the Smithsonian. And it's in a separate building, sort of catty corner from the White House. And I'll talk about the exhibit that's there currently at the very end of our program. So the local people might be very interested in visiting the Renwick. So a multiplicity of voices. Recently, museums have really increased their holdings by women, by people of color, and other marginalized communities. And throughout the Smithsonian, there are initiatives to make the museums more representative of the whole of America. And I think we all remember that little girl standing in front of Michelle Obama's portrait and seeing herself in the museum. So I think it's really important that we have our diverse community of Americans see themselves in the museums. The artists today that I'm going to show you really are looking at their past and they're looking at their present. So I will look at African American artists, Latino artists, American Indian artists, and I'm missing one. Well, yeah, whatever. Oh, Asian American. Okay. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, but
The first paintings that I want to show you, you're probably saying to yourself, what is she doing showing us these pictures of this sea captain, John Murray, and his wife? They're obviously from the 18, these works were painted in 1810. But what's really so amazing about these two works of art, which are currently on view in the museum, are that they were painted by Joshua Johnson, who was a self-trained artist and former slave. And he's probably the earliest documented professional African-American painter that we know about. As I said, he's self-trained, but probably he knew the Peel family and probably saw their works of art. His sitters are a sea captain and his wife. They were both Irish immigrants who lived in Baltimore. And Johnson made a living painting merchants, seamen, and their families. I should have said at the beginning, I still have this persistent cough from my cold that I came back from Portugal with. So bear with me, and at least I'm not coughing in person in your faces. So what I want you to do with these two portraits is really take a look at the details. You know, we see their hair, their bangs. We see her lace, her jewelry, his neck wear. You know, they're really beautiful, finely tuned paintings of a man who learned his craft very, very well. There was some information that came to light actually in the 1990s that document that George Johnson purchased Joshua from a man named William Wheeler as a baby. And he apprenticed him to a blacksmith. And Joshua's mother was probably an enslaved woman owned by Wheeler. So that's what we know about Joshua Johnson's history. It turns out that this captain died in a sea battle in 1813 off the coast of Portugal, and I was just there. Anyway, these are really lovely portraits. And also, the Smithsonian American Art Museum is a repository of an enormous amount of work. And many of these things are in storage and maybe would come out for a special collection and maybe will never come out. So we're so lucky with Zoom that we can look at things online and that the whole collection is digitized. We don't know who this man is, but in 2021, very recently, the museum acquired a significant collection of early American photography from a man named Larry West. And this collection actually included over 280 objects from the 1840s to the 1920s. And so why, again, am I showing you these? Because many of the works in this collection are early works by African-American daguerreotypists. I'm going to give you the name of one, James Ball, and I'll tell you why. You'll understand why I'm highlighting him. The Museum of American Art now owns the largest collection of daguerreotypes by three African-American artists and many others. You know, they're tiny little works. They're like 2 inches tall. They're part of jewelry. They're painted miniatures. These works of art are really quite incredible. And as I said, I wanted to highlight this man named James Bell, who was born in Frederick, Virginia in 1825. And he probably learned his trade of daguerreotype photography from a free man in Boston. He was also a free man. He went to Cincinnati. He tried to open a photography shop. He didn't do so well. He moved around. He became an itinerant photographer. And then he comes back to Cincinnati, and with his brother, he opens a small photography studio. He was also an abolitionist. So he worked for a lot of abolitionists. And you know, when you think about where Cincinnati is, it's right across the Ohio River, and there were lots of free men and slaves who went through Cincinnati on their way up the Underground Railroad. As I said, he moved around a lot, and he was actually named the official photographer for the 25th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. So this is a man who really made a living with his photography and was very well known in the United States, and especially around the Cincinnati area. So remember his name, James Bell. Now I'd like to look at this landscape painting, and I'm going to ask you to tell me what you see in this painting. You can put it in the chat. Phil and will watch the chat. She can tell us what you've said, or you can raise your hand and unmute. So tell me what you see in this lovely landscape.
Somebody says a rainbow.
Okay.
Toby, a rainbow.
Do some close looking, as we say.
Serenity, a river.
Yeah, it's a very serene painting.
Pastoral, peaceful.
Yes, great
Cowboy.
words.
Yep.
What?
Cowboy, cattle.
Yeah, and it's probably not cowboys, but definitely people and definitely cattle. I'm going to look at the chat too here. Give me a sec. Okay, let me move this over.
Optimism, I like that too.
Oh, and there's a rainbow.
Mhm.
And the new frontier, someone said. So let's look at the date of this painting. It's 1859. And we know that the Civil War is on the horizon, but it's such a beautiful, pastoral,
Mhm.
hopeful landscape. It was painted by a man named Robert Duncanson, who was America's best known African-American painter in the years between around the Civil War. There's a home area, there's a tribute to the slave featured in the book Beloved, also Museum to the History of the Underground Railroad. And Duncanson also lived in Cincinnati, and he was supported by abolitionists. They actually paid for him to go to Europe and study the old masters. But, you know, this is such an idyllic, peaceful landscape. And the future is really looming very dark. But he has in this painting a hope for peace before the onset of the Civil War. The reason I told you about Ball, is that Duncanson worked with Ball. Ball created this abolitionist pamphlet, and it was Duncanson who created this huge mural to go with this abolitionist pamphlet and it depicted the slave trade. You might also have seen this picture somewhere else. When Biden was inaugurated and went to the Capitol, Jill had picked this painting as kind of a gift for the new administration. And it was shown in the Capitol, and there was a little ceremony. At the time, we were watching the inaugural and all the festivities, and I got very excited because I said, that's our painting. That's our painting. Now it is back in the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And I think actually it's on view right now. So it was only temporarily taken off view for the inauguration. Okay.
Just one other interruption. Mary Bussey says Harriet Beecher Stowe lived in this area.
Okay, in the Cincinnati area. Okay, right. It was really a lot of abolitionists were there in that area. All right, and and Derek said, it's the serenity of the painting really conflicts with the turbulence of these times. And, it's a very hopeful painting by Duncanson. All right. So I think we have seen this work of art, or this pot, this huge glazed jar, but I did want to show it again. It was created in 1860 by a man named Dave Drake. And it's untitled, There was just an exhibit in Boston about the people who were enslaved, who worked in pottery factories in Edgefield, South Carolina. And Dave Drake was one of these people. It's massive. If you notice, it's about almost 2 feet high and 2 feet around. It is a huge work of art and obviously very, very heavy. It's made out of a hard, non-porous stoneware that was just in abundance. So I want to show you what is inscribed at the top of this huge vessel. It's inscribed on both sides of the handles. And here's what it says. It says, a noble jar for pork or beef that carry it around to the Indian chief. And then on the other side, it says LM November 9th, 1860, Dave. Now, why this is so extraordinary is because this man was enslaved, but he could read and write. We think that he had been owned by a man named Harvey Drake and Abner Landrum. And we think that he worked in Landrum's newspaper and he might have learned to read and write there. After that period, he was sold to a man named Lewis Miles. So when this was done, he was actually enslaved to a man named Lewis Miles. So here he's telling us the use of this pot. The meat was probably salted and smoked and soaked in brine and stored in this pot. But even more importantly, he signed it and dated it. And really, this was rare. He identifies himself, and this is really transgressive. It was subversive. He is saying to his slave master, I'm a brave guy here, and I am telling you who I am. A lot of his work was, had little poems on it too. He had a sense of humor, but definitely by showing his name and writing this, he was really, this was really a subversive act on his part. He was emancipated in 1863, and interestingly enough, after that, he did not sign and write on his work. He also took the name Dave Drake after his emancipation. So I think it's a very interesting story about a man who was incredibly talented potter and also incredibly brave. His slave owner knew what he was doing, but he needed him. Okay, so now, so I said to you, there are a lot of people in our collection who are marginalized, whose work has not been shown traditionally. And we have a whole area in the museum called folk and self-trained, self-taught or untrained artists. And these people really, the works are really by people with their own personal vision. And this work, that I have two works of art here, are done by a woman named Nellie Mae Rowe. And I want you to tell me again, maybe, what you see in these two paintings. lots of color, absolutely. Very colorful. And someone said curiosity. Could I have you unmute and tell me why you say that? Making a point. Look at her body language. They are primitive. They definitely show determination. She's looking right at us. This is a woman who's brave. Linda says she loves the picture of the dog. And believe it or not, the painting on the right is called At the Art Gallery. So someone is looking at this picture of a dog in an art gallery. Sarita thinks it could possibly be a self-portrait or portrait of a family pet, which made the museum. So someone said a very primitive style. And you know, Betsy, it does almost look like a halo surrounding a woman's head. Corrine says she saw her exhibit in the Brooklyn Museum, which actually gets right into what I'm going to tell you about her. This is a woman who was born into slavery, or she was the daughter of enslaved people. Sorry, she's older than that. But her life was really shaped by segregation, by poverty, by ongoing expression. Linda, hold that question. Phil, let's go back to that one. And those experiences in her life really informed her work. She labored as a child. She worked as a domestic. Her life really wasn't her own. But in 1948, her second husband died. And she said, you know, it's time to go back to my creative self. And in 1968, it said that she was really impacted by the election of Shirley Chisholm, who was a Black woman who urged women to rebel against their oppression, against the patriarchy of men and racism. And she really said, this is the time for me to recapture my lost childhood. So in her area where she lives, she kind of transformed her property into this playhouse, and she hung trinkets and she started painting. And you know, this is a picture on the left, a self-portrait of her determination, her persistence. She's taking control of her narrative. And the people in her local area knew about her talent, but actually a collector and a dealer whose name is Judith Anderson, I want to say discovered her, but started working with her and helped her exhibit, believe it or not, in Atlanta and in New York City. And I guess in, let's see, you saw at the Brooklyn Museum too. And, you know, she felt so marginalized, but in her lifetime, she knew that her work was at these museums, and suddenly she knew that her work was being appreciated. So I think this is really an amazing story, and we have that in our museum. And Linda asked, how is the quality of folk art by self-taught artists defined? And I'm clearly not the expert for the in-depth answer to that, but if these people were self-trained, they did not see art in museums. They might have seen, you know, fragments in magazines or something like that. And so folk art has a lot to do with teaching yourself, and it's kind of a more primitive, and I kind of am hesitant to use that word, but style. And so I'm probably not answering your question very well, but a lot of the works in our museum are, you know, primitive, more folk-like, and Grandma Moses is a good example. And she too, you know, she started painting at a very late age. And if you come to the museum, there are other artists who find some ways to express themselves by looking outside and seeing things around them. So I'm probably not the best answer to that question because it's not an easy one. Anyway, okay, so thanks for sharing all that. I didn't know that she had an exhibit in Brooklyn, but I'm going to come back to her at the very end of our presentation. So thank you. All right. This is another work that I think is really important, and I want to know if any of you recognize anything about the back and the front of this vase. Ah, okay, Frederick Douglass. He's definitely on the right. Exactly. All right. And I'm going to put up the name of the artwork. It's created by a man named Robert Lugo. And Robert Lugo is of Puerto Rican descent. And he lived, oops, let me get this. He lived, I think, in Philadelphia, and I could have that wrong. And he kind of started out. All right, we'll talk about the woman on the right in a second. He started out as a graffiti artist, and he ended up going to community college, and his teachers said, you know, you have talent and you need to take some art classes. And so he started taking art classes, and the ceramics class was really the one that turned him on. And he basically said that ceramics saved his life. And so in his artwork, and that he uses very bold colors, it's kind of hard to see in this. He uses colors that hip hop artists might use. He's a trained artist. He went to school, and he has dragons. He probably studied Chinese art. So he's taking all of these influences and putting them together. And notice this is a very big vase. And what he does is he wants to celebrate the contributions of different historic people, Frederick Douglass on the left, and on the right is Frederick Douglass's wife, Anna Murray Douglass. We have not heard of Anna Murray Douglass. You know, we've heard of Harriet Tubman. Somebody guessed that that might have been her, but this is Douglass's wife, a woman that we don't know about, that we hadn't known about. And she really supported his causes. She was a free African-American woman. She helped him gain his freedom. She supported him financially, emotionally. She raised their children. She was very involved with abolitionist causes. They lived in Rochester for a while. They opened their home as part of the Underground Railroad. So she was really a central player in Douglass's life. And here's a quote from Douglass. He says, "I put these stories on pottery because pottery lasts forever. It is how we know about cultures past, and I refuse to have our stories forgotten. We are here. We demand to be seen as sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, not dispensable beings. So many of his works include people that we have not heard of, that he does not want us to forget. And actually, this vase is still on view at the Portrait Gallery. It's part of our permanent collection that's on view right now. Okay. So now we're going to move to another group. We're going to move to Asian Americans, and I put two works of art by this particular artist on the screen at once. This is a man named Yasuo Kuniyoshi. He was very, very well known on the West Coast. And he was born in Japan, I think in the late 1880s. And he came here as a teenager. And he's an esteemed artist between World War I and World War II. Now think about this. In the 1920s, there were lots of anti-Asian, there was lots of anti-Asian discrimination in our country. There were anti-immigration laws. It was very restrictive. These laws prevented him from becoming a citizen. He marries a woman here in the United States from a wealthy family, and her family disowned her because of her marriage to Kuniyoshi. As I said, he was very well known, and his early works were they were funny, they were humorous. And notice the picture, the painting, the little painting on the left. You know, this is a hard thing to do with Zoom because this little painting is 14 by 11 and the painting on the right is 57 by 45. But if I put it, you know, in context, you couldn't even see the little one on the left. So this is the remains of Kuniyoshi's lunch. And here he's really drawing on the brushwork that he learned in Japan. He made a living making these little brushwork paintings in California. And, you know, there's some humor here and sort of verbal puns too. You know, the remains of his lunch, he has a demi-tasse spoon, he has a cigarette butt, dollops of pear sauce, pastry cup. He also has a pair of pears, so he's playing on homonyms. His wife said that he loved pears and pear sauce. He's got little birds and leaves and flutes, fruits in the border. This is kind of a fun painting, but life was not so fun for him. And so he and his wife actually spent a lot of time in Paris. And that's where he studied art, Western art. So the painting on the left is sort of influenced by his Japanese designs. But then on the right, we have a Western influence. And this strong woman, you know, she's probably a circus performer. She's standing on a stage. There's a French flag in the background. And we think that probably this is a mother figure, and it might be a stand-in for his wife, Catherine, who really protected him. It might be that he's the child that she's protecting. It might, you know, it's just a symbolic portrait of him and his wife. But again, he was very, very well known, especially on the West Coast. And in his artwork, he really used his Japanese background and the work that he studied in Europe. Okay, so we're going to look at another work of art that I'd like to spend a little time actually talking about. Again, now I would like to ask you what you see in this artwork. It's quite large, and it's really an interesting work of art. Is she great? We got Superman there, and is she daydreaming about him? Or it could be an aviator. He looks menacing or ominous. Okay. Looking at her, what might she be doing? She might be thinking about this ominous figure. And John says it's the beginning of the war. He looked down at the date, the diary of December 12th, 1941. Okay. Writing material, she's getting ready to paint. She's wearing a kimono, and she's clearly deep in thought. Okay, interesting juxtaposition of this contemplative woman and the coming war. You know, it doesn't look doesn't look classically Japanese, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But they're clearly, if I said to you, where was this? You would probably say a Japanese house with, you know, movable screens. She's sitting low on a writing bench. Okay, so we know that this was the title of this work of art is December 12th, 1941. And Roger Shimomura is a third generation Japanese American. He creates paintings. Thanks, Denise. We'll come back to that. He creates paintings that blend Japanese imagery with American pop culture. And you guys zeroed right in on that at the beginning, because I think you talked about Superman. I think that, you know, and Shimomura and his family were removed to an internment camp during the war. I think they were in Camp Minidoka, which is in Idaho. And obviously with President Roosevelt's 1099, that's not the right, 1099 edict, they moved people from the West Coast who they felt were dangerous to lots of internment camps. 120,000 people were moved to these camps. When his family was released, they moved to Chicago, and then they went back to Chicago. And he went to school, he went to art school, but this is his style. He paints things in a Japanese kind of style with American pop culture. And this particular work of art is based on his grandmother's diary. A lot of his works combine woodcut prints and his own experiences, and he really used his grandmother's diary. On December 12th, 1941, they are still on the West Coast. They haven't been moved to the internment camp yet. However, their bank accounts were frozen immediately when Pearl Harbor happened, December 7th. So on December 12th, His grandmother writes, I spent all day at home. Starting from today, we were permitted to withdraw $100 from the bank. This was for our subsistence of life. We who are enemy to them. And then she says, I deeply felt America's large-heartedness in dealing with us. So here she is, thanking Americans for allowing her to remove $100 from a bank account, not knowing what her future is going to bring on this particular day. You know, you all went back, you all talked about Superman. Can you see my cursor?
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
okay. You all talked about Superman, and during the war, Superman was used a lot in advertisements to get people to buy war bonds. And sometimes the script says, stamp out the Japanese on these posters of Superman. Any other thoughts on this painting? Okay, let's go on then. Now we're, yeah, it is very thought-provoking. It certainly was. And I do a lot of tours with kids, and they really get into this painting, that painting. Now here's a work from the Renwick Gallery. It's probably, yeah, I think it's on display right now as well. And it's a vase with landscape and dinosaurs. And I want to tell you a little bit about Stephen Young Lee. He studied in Asia, and he always said that when I was studying pottery, in Asia, it had to be perfect. We copied the works of great masters, and we had to copy them perfectly. But when he came to America, or when he came back to America after studying in Asia, he said, but when I work in America, it allows me to be much more creative. Stephen Young Lee is the child of Korean immigrants, and he looks at being a minority in this country. He works in metropolitan areas, he works in the US, he works in Asia, and he says in a quote, I have considered being an outsider in the country of my heritage to being one of a minority of Asians in Montana. My work allows me to reinterpret and confront questions of place and belonging. So notice how he's taken this perfect pot that he's created and deconstructed it. And you know, he defies our perception that things need to be perfect. Okay, also, notice here, this is a close-up of what he's painted in his glazes. We've got dinosaurs. So he's really, you know, using a lot of humor here too. And someone said that they see a human form with a broken heart. And that's an interesting perspective that you bring to this incredibly beautiful vase. And maybe even outstretched arms, a cocked head, and a hole in his heart. I see eyes upside down, maybe looking over a wall. That's all possibly also. Here's another quote from Stephen Young Lee. He said, "My passion for historical ceramics and insights on the past. Ceramic production has long been influenced by an industrial standard of perfection, but deconstructing and imploding the forms creates a visceral reaction that defies the human desire for perfection and confronts the perception of value. It's in this act, that I hope to challenge and redefine what is beautiful." Actually, the Renwick had a whole exhibit of just his work. It was pretty extraordinary. And one of you says it looks like a tattooed body. It does. So I love how you all are bringing your ideas to the conversation. So keep it. Now, there's another work of art. And how would you describe this work of art? If somebody had not seen it and you had to tell them what you were looking. Wispy, deteriorating leaves, autumn leaves, countries. Looks like a map, or made out of beads. It's got those dots. Pointillism, leaves floating on water. Endangered earth. God, I love these. Susan says war. I wonder why Susan says war. Susan, you want to unmute for a minute? Airplane flight paths, okay?
Winds.
Abstract nature over a loosely drawn map, population, movement, bacteria. So these ideas that you have are just amazing. This is such a fluid, colorful work of art that's acrylic, ink, and oil on paper. And it's, I don't have the size of this. I don't even have it on my notes. I apologize. It's pretty big, I think, because I remember seeing it. Battle plans. Okay, so let's think if we can kind of take this apart. Tiffany Chung is an internationally known mixed media artist. And you guys got it. She explores migration, she explores conflict, she explores shifting geography. She has lots of maps in her body of work that show political and natural upheavals. We had an exhibit by her. It was a small exhibit when we had our huge Vietnam exhibit in the museum. And what she does is she tells an alternative story of the Vietnam War. Her father was a pilot for South Vietnam, and she has made maps of all of her father's journeys and the airfields in his military missions. And she's created these multimedia works of art based on those maps. She also interviews lots of people who lived through the war, and she has in her exhibits, she has a lot of interviews and videos of people talking about their experiences in the war. So this is a map, a battle plan of an experience that her father had, or multiple experiences, she might have put. a few together, but it's kind of interesting that here is someone who is Vietnamese and how she's re-looked at the history of her family and has looked at the Vietnam War from a different perspective. Any other thoughts? I love all your comments. And Bill knew about airplane flight paths. Oh my gosh. Hit it right on the nose. All right, so now we're going to look at another group of, no, actually, we're not quite going to look at another group of people yet. I'm just going to spend a couple minutes on this little work of art by a woman named Erin Ham Swiftventus. And let's see, my paper's got a little bit screwed up here. All right, I'm just going to talk from the top of my head here. Her mother's Korean, and she learned sewing from her mother. And notice this is a work of art that was created in 2017. And she has a kind of a project in California to create posters for different demonstrations. And this poster was created in her with her group of people, and they were protesting Trump's when he ceased the DACA program. And so they were making these posters and banners for a protest. And on this particular banner, she says, another world is possible if we work hard, and you know, a more just and equitable world is definitely possible. And she lends out these banners so that people don't have to destroy them and make new ones. So she has like a recycling factory of banners. I love it. Okay, so now we really are going to another people. Again, I'm going to ask you what you notice about this work of art. And now we're going to look at Hispanic and Latino works of art. 1:30 to 3. I'm really kind of running behind. What do you notice here?
Color.
Lots of color, beautiful color.
Hmm. Looks like a raid and an oppression in the barrio. So, and somebody noticed porn in the window, absolutely. But a lot is going on in this particular painting. This is done by a man named Frank Romero, and he's paying tribute to a man named Ruben Salazar, who was killed in 1970. Salazar was covering the Chicano moratorium. He was a newspaper journalist. The police were called out. He moved to the Silver Dollar Cafe, which you can just barely see here. And the police thought there was some kind of riot and some kind of disturbance. And they fired tear gas into this cafe, and Salazar was killed. So he is paying tribute to this incident and to this journalist who really was exposing some of the, the evils of our society. And another painting is by Ulloa, Domenico Ulloa. Oh my God, the worst time pronouncing his name. So what is the mood and the emotion depicted in this particular painting.
Mm.
I'm moving along a little bit fast.
Somber,
Very somber, Bill says.
looks like a raid.
Grim resignation, anger,
Mhm.
hopelessness. We've got that barbed wire. We've got people behind barbed wire. Does that bring back any memories
Immigration,
of paintings or photos that you've seen?
immigration.
Yeah, immigration, barbed wire,
Mm,
the Holocaust.
mhm.
Yeah, Japanese
Uh,
internment camps.
Yeah, that too. And Linda saw the title, and the Braceros was a program that was created in 1942. It was a multinational program between the United States and Mexico. While our farm workers were fighting in the war, we brought Mexican workers to primarily California, but to other places as well to fill in for the agriculture labor shortages that existed while our men were in World War II. And Romero, let me say this right, Ulloa, he had fought in World War II. He had seen the liberation of the Holocaust camps. But when he came back to America after the war, it was his goal to paint. All his paintings were inspired by common people in their work, in their joy, and in their struggle. And here he's painting workers as part of the Braceros program, which, believe it or not, lasted from 1942 until 1964. But he's really highlighting the conditions of the workers. Notice their camps, notice their clothes. This is a somber painting of poor people and poor living conditions. We know that there are a lot of people working here, but we really only see the faces of 3 people. If you were able to see this work of art in person, the brushwork is very heavy, and I think that lends itself to the emotionality of the painting. It is on view now in the news. This is a work by a woman named Esther Hernandez. And do you all see an image that you're familiar with on both sides here? Who do we have in the middle of this woman's back on the right? Our Lady of Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary, the Virgin of Guadalupe. And these are different ways of depicting them. Esther Hernandez is really an advocate for Chicano power and LGBT rights. And she saw her art as a tool for social change. And notice, especially, look at the one on the left. This little etching shows the Virgin and Esther as this modern karate kicking woman, breaking out of her sunburst, breaking the barriers. And I just think it's just a wonderful way of her saying Chicano women need to break down those barriers. And on the right side, we think that that's probably
evidence of the fact that she's a lesbian woman, and there's another woman holding out a flower to her. And so in both works of art, she's looking at how Chicano women and lesbian women are marginalized. And she really feels that her art is a tool for social change. These two works of art were in an exhibit of screen prints of Chicano art that we had at the museum not so long ago. Between COVID and what's so long ago, I'm not sure. I think it was pre-COVID. It was just before COVID. Yeah. So this is our newest work of art that is currently in the museum. And I came around the corner and it's very large, even though I don't have dimensions for it, but I bet these two figures are about 4 feet high. And then there's this huge background beyond them. And Linda, are you talking about this hairstyle? And it comes from the American Gothic. This artist, George Rodriguez, is very familiar, as you are, with this famous painting, which is in the Chicago Museum of Art. So, what do these two have so much in common?
The pose, they're looking straight ahead pretty much.
The pose are looking straight ahead at us.
There's no movement.
No movement at all, right? Very somber. This artist really wants to emphasize the contributions of Mexican American workers. And I put this away, but if you look carefully at this work of art, except for the faces, it's made out of all these flowers. They're all stoneware. Somebody asked about the material, and you know, the man, because he's got the broom in American Gothic, she's got the broom, he's got the pitchfork, so it's a little bit different. But I want you to hear what Rodriguez says about his flowers. From a distance, the ornamentation is texture and pattern. Upon closer inspection, the individual flowers reveal themselves. Flowers have a lifestyle that is in some ways analogous to the process of looking at, seeing, and getting to know a work more intimately over time. A work can blossom with and expand with more attention and curiosity. And I really think that my questions today have really asked you to do that, to look carefully at some of these works of art. For those who are local, you really have to come and see this work of art. It's really quite amazing. All right, now we're going to move on to a little bit about American Indians in our last 15 minutes or so. When you look at this painting by Fitz Shoulder, what do you notice first? Solitude. This Indian's by himself. Stark, striped jacket.
Either very large body or has multiple layers of clothing.
Right, it's out of proportion for sure. Okay, a desolate environment. It's not the way you have traditionally, stereotypically pictured American Indians. Fritz Schroeder is 1/4 member of the Luciano Indian tribe. And he, which is a California mission tribe. And he said at the beginning of his career, I'm a non-Indian Indian.
Hmm.
And I really don't want to paint Indians. He goes to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1964 to teach. And he's painting landscapes at this time. And he said, I'm never going to paint Indians. However, by 1967, he really changed his opinion because he saw that American Indians weren't being painted as they lived in 1967. So he really broke away. He was like one of the first ones who broke away from stereotypes and changed the way that Indians are portrayed. Here's another American Indian artist who's extraordinarily famous right now, Kay Walking Stick. And this is the Oria Verde Valley at the Rio Grande, and it's along the banks of the Rio Grande and within the gorge. And so what do you notice about this painting? And I have to tell you that it's 2 panels and you can barely see the line. The people who took this picture really did a great job of blurring that line. But what do you notice about this particular lens? Okay, and we'll talk about that Indian motif at the bottom in just a minute, Bill. And notice it's on one side. Patterns maybe of an Indian blanket for that motif. It's very angular, very linear. Your eyes, there's a tension that's created by having diagonal lines. A US border wall, it could also be a bridge. It's definitely Southwestern colors, but Toby said that the colors aren't so realistic. Yes and no, they're probably not totally realistic. I did, Linda, use this in a previous presentation. Gee, she remembers what I did, and I can't always. I have to look back. Thank you, Linda. I did use it, and it's very arid. It's more arid on this side than on this side. Kay Walking Stick does a lot of these landscapes, and this is huge. It's 40 by 80, and they're really powerful landscapes. And she tries to put something kind of spiritual in with her cultural memory. And what she does, I was looking up some information about her. This is sort of, two representations of the same space. This is a little greener with a tree here. The river runs through here. She takes a lot of pictures and photographs, and then she does research on the Indian people who lived in that area. And so she actually went to the Smithsonian, through the Smithsonian's collection, and found Pueblo pots from this area. And she used those Pueblo pots, the motifs, as Bill said, from the Pueblo pots, and superimposed them on the landscape. And Linda will probably remember my saying, she wants us to remember that Indians are still around. How old is the artist? I don't have when she was born. She's been working since the 1960s. So that's 60 years. So she's probably not young. But that's as close as I can get. Sorry. But she's very well known. And I just read that the National Gallery of Art, for those of you who live in Washington, is going to have a work of American Indian contemporary artists that I think is curated by her. Thanks, Patricia. 1935. Okay. Thank you. So see, she's not so young. But she's going to curate an exhibit at the National Gallery, I think in this fall. This is another work of art by a woman, Shan Gosharn, and it's a basket that's again in the collection, and I think it's on view now as well. And she entitles this Song of Sorrow. She writes Navajo and Lakota and Cow prayers of healing. And in her work that she paints her splints with watercolor, and then she adds words. And some of the words are prayers for generations of Indians, and she's also recalling the Indians that were boarding school victims in this work of art. They were forcibly separated from their families, and somewhere in here it says, "We will remember your sacrifices. You will not be forgotten." So she, like Kay Walking Stick, does not want us to forget. Also, embedded in here in the white part, believe it or not, is the lyrics from the song 10 Little Indians, which are very stereotypical and violent in children's songs. You know, we would never use that little book anymore because of its depiction of Indians. So she's really calling for us to remember and also be empathetic. Bill says it looks square, but it looks kind of circular. The bottom is square, but the way she weaves it, the top ends up being circular. And, you know, that's the craft of a master weaver. And I think Denise brings up a really interesting point that the blue is a reflection of the feelings. Okay, we have one more work of art. I'm sure
We've seen this before too.
you
Yeah.
have seen this before, but maybe not everyone has seen this before.
Right.
Hilda says, wow. Hilda, maybe you haven't seen this before. Tell me what you see. This is a huge collage, 48 by 72. It was done in 2000 by John Quick to See Smith, who again is a very well-known American Indian artist. And I think she's from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes of the Flathead Nation in Montana. Hope I have that right, Herman. Anyway, tearful country, sadly a nation falling apart, tears, melting pot. We're having a meltdown. Yeah, right. Anything else that you notice about this map? You're all getting the point of the tears and the flowing paint. Anything else that you notice? Oh, 5 new messages, sorry. I'm not doing a good, drab colors. Not all the states are named. So Linda, there's a reason for that. It is the red blood. It's not blood, but it signifies blood. It's just red oxide paint. But definitely I'm going to show you a close-up of the center part. And you can see some of the state names a little more clearly. And you notice that some states, you can't see, there are no state names. And so what she has done is she has left the names of the states that have a derivation from an Indian word. And I'm going to point out just 2 of them. Wyoming is, I know I have this, hold on. It's from a Delaware Indian word, whoops, meaning between mountains and valleys. And you know, if you drive through Wyoming, that's definitely the case. And Kansas comes from a Sioux word, meaning people of the south wind. When my husband and I used to drive across country to Denver, we would always be in Kansas. I'm telling you, it was always windy. And who knew that that came from a Sioux word? But they nailed that word, I'll tell you. John Quick to See Smith really wants us to understand again about American Indian heritage and problems when the white man came in. Here's what she says, and I'll end with this quote of hers. Art should reveal the unknown to those who lack the experience to see it. Every map is a political map and tells a story. We're the original owners of this country. Our land was stolen from us by the Euro-American invaders. I can't say strongly enough that my maps are about stolen lands, our very heritage, our cultures, our worldview, our being. Every map is a political map and tells a story that we are alive everywhere across the nation. And I will conclude with, in the next couple minutes that I have, with something to share. The exhibit, for those of you who are local, at the Renwick right now is the work of, it's called the Renwick Invitational, and it's the work of 6 American Indian artists who take traditional crafts, who take traditional skills and have created something totally new. And the title of this of the exhibit is Sharing Honors and Burdens. And finally, for those of you who aren't local, I have something for you too. And let me see if I can do this. All right. The Smithsonian has, whoops, let me see, has a new series of comic books online. This is for children across the country. And they have highlighted inspiring women artists. This is 8 of the 20 that are online right now. I've given you the web link, and we've looked at some of these. Tiffany Chung, Kay Walking Stick. Smithsonian thinks these people are pretty important. They're trailblazers. John Quick to See Smith and Nellie Mae Rose. So I said I would come back to her. So there are 20 comics that I think adults will enjoy too, but definitely share them nationally with your children and your grandchildren. So thank you very much.
Thank
A little
you.
something for everyone.
Wow.
And I'm turning it back to Derek, I think.
Another fabulous
Good.
presentation, Sarah.
Thank
Let-
you.
Let me unmute. Thank you so much, Sarah, for another just brilliant presentation. Want to thank Phil for coordinating the class, and Trudy for her role in introducing AARP, and of course all the AARP members who are watching today. So I'm going to conclude. One thing I forgot, just to urge folks to consider an LLI membership. Some of the classes that we're offering this summer abbreviated session are on World War I, on cooking classes, obviously the art class. We've got travel logs, courses on politics and poetry. We had one this week on the Victorian Internet, the Telegraph, American Revolution, the Peace of Westphalia, just a number of them, all included in your $110 membership. So finally, I just urge you to take a look on our website, llinova.org, and I think you'll find us the best deal in town. So thank everyone very much for another wonderful session, and I'll turn it back to you, Phil.
Yeah, the only thing I have to say is that Sarah and we have a fall date, November 13th. So
But we don't know what we're doing yet.
we
but
don't know
have
if
a
that's
date.
going to be a surprise, but there is something coming in the fall. So stay tuned, and welcome again to all the folks who came from around the country to have a look at our program, and we invite you to join. In any case, have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Somebody asked for the link, and I don't know if they asked for the Smithsonian link or for the link to the evaluation. So,
This is recorded, and AARP puts out the link later. So yes, it'll be available to LLI
Okay.
people, and it'll be available to everybody. Do I have that right, Trudy? Is Trudy still there?
I'm still here, but Phil, I think they were looking for the link to LLI. I
Right.
put it in there.
Oh, okay.
I also put a link to a survey. If you enjoyed today's program, please
We have more.
click on that link and let us know how we did in our selection of this collaboration. And just a reminder, we have another joint program on July 11th.
11th,
At
right.
10 o'clock on the American Revolution. And you
Yes.
can get to that through the aarp.org website and the community events.
Mhm. And I'm coordinating that one too. So again, our link is LLINOVA, NOV like Victor A.org. Very easy. And you can explore the website. You don't need to sign in or anything. You can see what we offer. So
Thank you,
Sarah.
Sarah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all.
Have a good day, everyone.
appreciate it
Thank you.
very, very
You
much.
too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.